And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. A special interview with author Dr. Paul C. Vitz. The book, The Complementarity of Women and Men, published by the Catholic University of America Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. And it's a thrill to have you on the program, Dr. Vitz, after many, many years.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. I've not ever been here before, and nice to see you in the face.
Absolutely. I was a big fan of many of your books in the past and some talks you gave over the years. And this one is subtitled about philosophy, theology, psychology, and art. How did you decide to have it parsed into those separate groups?
Well, I knew the authors, or I knew that if I didn't know them personally, I knew some of their writings. And I thought it would make a nice package. And I think it does coherently fit together to give the perspective on complementarity. We have three women who wrote chapters. We have two men who wrote chapters. So we have, I think, a nice, shall we say, diverse spectrum of writers. And I think I worked hard to make sure that they all sort of fit together, integrated a little bit with each other, but were separate because they each have a different message.
So
it fills the picture.
A little bit of complementarity there in how you put this together as well, right?
Yeah, I'm afraid you're using the word quite right and in a different way. Yes.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, why is the concept of complementarity of women and men such an important issue today in your mind?
Well, we all know that it's the pressure from the opposite interpretation. I mean, for the longest time, everybody knew there were men, there were women. Anthropologists have made it very clear. Every culture they have ever studied has made a binary distinction between men and women, and men and women in every culture they've studied have sort of had different roles. They had things they did in common, of course, but they also had different functions in the society. And so it wasn't an issue. It was just, they understood there were men and there were women and there were some significant differences. Now, of course, there were some bad parts of that. There were sometimes men would be, brutal to women or hostile in various ways and not treating women well enough. But essentially, in the faith, thanks to Our Lady and many wonderful female saints,
Right.
in any case, women are given great honor. And of course, it's very clear in Genesis that God made us male and female. And he made us in his image, so that means that male and female is a better image of him than either male or female by itself.
Right, I think that's a great point you make in saying we need to see those two together to get the full picture of the image of God.
Right. That's what we do when we see them together.
Right.
But the culture today is against that. They actually want women to turn into men, that is to be equal to men in every way, that men are in any way successful. And so they're really trying to get rid of what we mean by women. They don't value the great virtues and accomplishments of women, namely their interpersonal virtues, their capacity for love and for nurturance. Sometimes you hear some guy say, "I'm a self-made man." Don't believe it. Talk to his mother, who changed his diapers, who tied his shoes, who fed him and nurtured him and supported him.
Right.
If it weren't for women with their nurturing capacities, their maternal abilities, and their interpersonal skills, none of us would even be here.
Right. Now, in the very beginning, you dedicated the book to Timmy, my wife of more than 50 years, your daughter, your daughter-in-law, your many granddaughters, and you say they've taught you a great deal about complementarity. What did your wife teach you?
My wife?
Yeah.
Well, look, there's a lot of complementarity. On the other hand, she's also a professor. Now she's retired. But she was a professor of French literature at New York University, where we both taught, where we met and got married, and we both taught for many years. But the complementarity, she loves to cook, and I love to eat.
There you go.
And the other complementary now with our grandchildren, she's so great. My wife is just wonderful at interpersonal contacts, keeping track of what people, it's not just birthdays and a little present or that, but keeping track of what's going on in their lives and helping and saying, and every now and then bringing me in as a helper because I can probably add something. But it's because she saw it and because she's aware of the personal, emotional life of so many people.
Right.
And that's a skill that she has that's interpersonal. Of course, she was a professor, and so we overlapped on that. We were different kinds, but that's how she was complementary.
Well, at the very beginning, you'd say men and women are fundamentally equal. Men and women are fundamentally the same. These two sentences are not equivalent. What do you mean?
Well, I don't mean that we're the same. We are equal in dignity, but we have significant differences. And those are the two first premises of Sister Mary Prudence. We're equal in dignity, equal in importance and morality. We're equally reflecting of a different way of God's image. But we have significant differences.
Right.
And that's what every culture had noticed before and had taken into its account. Right. And now that's being challenged by people who want to say there's no difference. They want to say not only that we are equal in dignity, but they want to say that we're physically and psychologically the same.
Let me ask
we're
you that.
We're not the same.
Right. And you go out and the various authors and you have charts and information and studies that reinforce all of this. And it's so obviously science. If we followed the science, we would know what the right answer is. But we do seem to live in a world, like you said, the idea of the masculine aspects are in a sense a negative for men, but somehow a positive for women. We see these super characters in TV shows and movies where women are not only the smartest one in the room, but they're actually the strongest and the most athletic.
Yeah, they're turning women into men. And by the way, I won't go into it here, but that's what Satan wants too, because he wants to get rid of our bodies. And women are much more tied to their body because of pregnancy and giving birth and nursing and all of that. And Satan can't stand the fact that we're embodied. God made us embodied.
Right.
And so one way to get rid of it is to have us all turn into one sex, particularly men who seem to want to get rid of the body anyway. If you look at artificial intelligence and robotics, they're quite willing to say, "Oh, I'll put my personality up on the internet in an electronic form."
Well, it seems like we're a lot of people, especially young people, seem to be open to living a virtual existence.
Yes, and that's another topic. It's a very important one, and I think it's very disturbing because virtual is not reality. And reality is what we were made for. And the faith is about reality. It's not about abstractions or concepts. They're helpful sometimes, but it's about real contact. It's about the actual sacraments are real. People are real. Jesus was real. And we're called to reality. And it's the denial of reality that allows us to deny the notion that the sexes have significant differences.
Right. Now, you have information, like you're saying, the studies that one of them shows the very different brain activity patterns in healthy men and women. You go on to say significant conclusions were that men's brains were wired for perception and coordinated action. Women's brains were mapped for social skills and multitasking.
Yes. For example, women have a much larger corpus callosum. That's the structure that connects the left and the right hemisphere. So they can move back and forth between the two hemispheres very rapidly. And if anyone has to deal with children, you always have to be able to do that because you're getting interrupted all the time. And
you were saying, I think that's why guys don't like to be interrupted as much, as I think you point out in the book, right?
Absolutely, because when a woman hears a child crying, her response is, what can I do to help and make that person happy? When a man hears a child crying, he says, shut up. You're bothering me. And men are more wired front to back in the cortex, and not so much left to right.
You make the point that the reader may be aware that a common counter-argument to male-female differences is the observation of overlap. Most traits identify more strongly one sex or the other can commonly be found in both, and a particular individual man or woman may show a sex-linked trait more or less strongly. In fact, you point out the fact that many times we seem to focus on the exception and say, oh, well,
Yes.
that's not true all the time, so it can't be true.
Yes, that's what we do. We focus on the exception. We should focus on the typical. And even the exception often isn't that common. It is true, men. There are lots of women who are taller than men, but if you want somebody who's 6 feet or taller, out of the first 1,000 human beings, you'll get many more men than women, and it'll be the outriders. The outliers are more likely to be men. The outliers, the really tall, I think all of them are very short. The really moral, the really immoral, likely to be men. You notice when they want to copy men, they want to copy their positive characteristics. They never want to copy male negative characteristics. I mean, the prisons are filled with men, 90% men, not women.
Right.
They're not interested in women figuring out how to become serial killers.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting why even in that case, it's a man who tends to be the one to do that. Now you have it broken up in chapter 1. You've got renowned philosopher J. Buzinski, who sets the stage for subsequent chapters by promoting a Socratic dialogue. He goes on to say.
Yes.
That manhood and womanhood are truly different is not at all to say this difference is simple or all-encompassing, because men and women are not different species. I thought that was a good point. But corresponding sexes of the same species, each is defined partly in terms of the other.
Yes. And that has to do with both complementarity and with the notion of synergy. Synergy means that together, men and women can create something that neither sex could by itself. And the simplest example of that is a child. And the next example of that is a baby that thrives. Normally, if the mother is busy nursing and dealing with focused on the maternal aspects of the child, it helps to have a mate who is dealing with the outside world, who provides protection and brings in resources, because while she's heavily involved in that, she can't deal with going out and getting resources. She's, perhaps in labor or just recovering, or can't walk very fast when just before delivering and so on. And that's where you need the synergy that comes from the husband or the father who provides, protection, resources, support, so that the interior of the family life is quiet and functioning well.
He also makes the point here, I thought this was interesting, for even when men and women do step out of their roles, they tend to have different motives for doing so. Even when they do share tasks, they tend to view them differently.
Yes, we do. Women are always thinking, even when they're doing something positive like bringing in resources, they're thinking of them mostly in terms of the persons that they're helping and the relationships they're supporting and establishing and so forth. And men may be thinking of those resources as sort of an accomplishment, as more like, I'm getting paid more and I do provide all these things, but I'm not thinking of them so much about what they do for the other persons, but how they support my own understanding of importance.
Now, in Chapter 2, you had mentioned the name Sister Mary Prudence Allen, the foremost expert on the history of philosophy of woman, examines contemporary gender theory and offers a philosophical defense of gender reality. It goes on, gender ideologies hold that human beings fall along a continuum of 3, 5, or even 15 different loose groupings of gender. What is this gender ideology? Why is it a problem? Where did it come from?
Well, gender ideology is based upon a philosophy that is really separated from reality. If you're going to have a philosophy, there are basically two kinds: those that are based on reality, like Aristotle or Aquinas and many others. And science itself assumes there's a reality you can contact and know. But most philosophers are sort of subjective. They sort of think that the person creates reality. And you take that far enough, and you can create the reality of sexual character. Mm-hmm. And it's today, it's not up to 15, it's up to a couple hundred, I think.
Right.
In other words, what they want to do is get rid of the difference as having any significance. And it's socially created. It's created by us. It's not part of reality. It wasn't created by God. It's us creating who we are. We shall be as gods. And one way we shall be that way is to create who we are when we create our gender.
Now, you mentioned here, who mapped the virus of gender ideology? Why do you refer to it as a virus?
Well, I didn't.
She did.
Mr.
Okay.
Mary Boone did.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, because ideology is a pathology in the sense that it is not the gender ideology is not in contact with reality. It is a subjective thing in which what you mean by the value, what you mean by the importance, what you mean by the very nature of gender is up to you.
Right.
Or the social, or the society in some sense.
And it's something that is there, you don't always notice, but can have a terribly negative impact on society's health. I can
yes,
imagine,
and
right?
so, but it's up to you to, you define this. In Genesis, God says this was a reality He created, male and female.
Right.
These people are saying this is not a reality created by God or even by nature. Or it's not a reality. It's something we create. Mm-hmm. It's a subjective categorizing of the life around us.
Now, chapter 3, Deborah Savage is a philosopher, theologian. You talk about we will see that man and woman are both equal and different, and that they each bring distinct gifts to the task of human living, and that this chapter is intended as a starting place for what we might call the theology of complementarity. What is that?
Yes. Well, the theology means to move to the notion that, I think we've all experienced it intuitively, not knowing it in those terms. The theology of complementarity, we see it in the lives of Our Lady. We see her; she has a different kind of spirituality, a different way of being. She's our mother. We use the language of the distinction over and over again, father, mother, over and over again in describing the saints or in describing God and Jesus and describing Our Lady. And I think that one of the great things that Christianity has done is to allow us to see the wonderful genius that women have in their capacity to love, their capacity to help others, their capacity to accept suffering, right, which might have been seen prior to Christianity as a negative. Mm-hmm. But now that we recognize that accepting of suffering was at the center of Christ's redemption, we see its great significance, right, and its great positive value. And so there we have the whole beauty of the feminine world opened up to us. Right. We still have yet to appreciate it adequately, I think. Lots of Christian cultures in the past still were negative or somewhat critical of women, but in ways that they shouldn't have been. Right. But there the complementarity shows up in the theology.
Now, chapter 4, you have art historian Elizabeth Lev, and she examines the art of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel and makes the point, Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment, I thought this is interesting, where Mary, gentle and quiet, becomes as one with the thunderous Christ the Judge.
Yes. And there the complementarity is present, and underneath it all is their mutual love for each other, their great, and Mary as the great maternal figure and as the great adjuvant, so to speak, of Jesus. There we see the complementarity. It's also shown in Michelangelo's other paintings. Elizabeth Lev's article is really I think she's coming out with a book on it, but it's really a brilliant understanding of something that Michelangelo did that most people haven't recognized. And it is the sense in which Michelangelo always showed in his paintings of the genealogy of Jesus and of the predictors of Christ in the Hebrew prophets. He always matched every prophet with a female Sibyl or seer. He always matched a father who was part of the genealogy of Jesus. Not only the father, but he brought in the mother, which no one had ever done before.
Right. It's important to emphasize that sexual differences are not grounds for claiming that one sex is superior to the other. All chapters emphasize men and women have equal dignity and worth, and point that out.
Absolutely.
Now, in your
that's a premise that's very important and comes out of Sister Mary Allen and Mary Prudence Allen.
Right, and you in Chapter 5, which is your chapter, Men and Women, Their Differences in the Complementarity, and you talk about the three major models. What are those?
Well, the major models, there are a lot of models, of course, now, but one are that men are superior to women, or no, that one sex is superior to the other. Historically, it's been men superior to women, but now the new feminists, or some of them saying women are superior to men. So you can either have one sex superior to the other, or a second model would be that they're the same and there's no difference. And that flies in the face of all kinds of evidence. And the third one is the one I proposed, which is the one that Sister Mary Prudence proposes and so on. Equal dignity, significant difference, synergy when they're combined. And that's what the complementarity is about.
Right.
Complementarity means synergy. It means something greater than either one by themselves.
It's interesting, too, because you say men and women easily find each other irritating. The battle of the sexes probably goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Nevertheless, it is the case that an intelligent and wise understanding of male-female difference can greatly reduce the conflict and increase positive synergy.
Yes. People are easily irritated anyway by almost anything. And so, but some men irritate women sometimes, and women irritate men sometimes. But we have to recognize that over and above that is a great, if men have 10 units of goodness and women have 10 units of goodness, you put them together, you might think you'd only get 20 units. No. You put them together, you get 10 times 10. You get 100 units. That's synergy, a new family, a better child that's really developed and protected and nourished and given support, and a family that survives longer, and all the generations. And that comes from the synergy of men and women holding each other's hands and helping each other and each doing their share, carrying their share of the load.
Right. You say the concept of important sex differences is today controversial. One side of this is the recent use of the word gender for the prior almost universal term sex. You go on to say the word gender, because of its novelty and links to grammar and language, and not to any natural biological reality, already implies the notion that gender's meaning is arbitrary and socially constructed. You go on to say a person's gender has no serious base in biological reality, at least as far as society believes.
Yeah, that's why it's being used in the culture. But actually, every cell in your body is either male or female. We have all kinds of different hormonal experiences as we're developing in utero and then after we're born. And we also have physical differences. And of course, all these people who want to change their gender have to cut off all sorts of things, or take biochemicals and hormones and do all sorts of things to try to change the true reality of their body.
Right.
But, I want to mention one other thing today that's important. I don't mention it in that chapter, but the whole crisis of identity is what this is about. And the issue of transsexual is about what is our identity sexually, or in terms of gender, whatever you want to call it. But we forget there's another group of people out there who are trans species. There are a whole group of people trying to become animals, or say they already are part animal, or even all animal, not even human. Some people say I'm an elf, I'm not even human. Some people, one guy says he's a dragon. I'm an it. Look, what's going on here?
Right, exactly.
The idea that you could define yourself into another animal, maybe even an animal like a dragon that, as far as I'm concerned, never to ever exist. I don't want to get into that.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what happens when you
the dragon they're trying to become never existed.
Well, right.
And I'm not so sure about elves either.
Well,
I mean, they say they are elves, but and all I'm trying to say here is people are now in their identity trying to create themselves outside of the human species.
Absolutely. You also mentioned here, and I thought one last point before we got to go, the beginning of the gender ideology position goes back in large part to Marxist philosophers who argued for the social construction of the new anti-capitalist communist man.
Yes.
What is that connection then?
Well, the Marxists were very big on destroying the family. They wanted to get rid of the family, as they thought it was a bourgeois whatever. And they want to get rid of the family and have the state raise people, and they would come up with the worker, and the new personality would be the worker, who would be created by the state, and not out of family, and not out of religion, or not out of any of the traditional ways in which it had happened. And still today, there are lots of people who want to now create, they want to create not artificial wombs, they want to create state control of births and so on, and raising of children, controlling everything in the schools and so forth. This is the state trying to control the nature of the personality, and of course they believe in the social construction of everything.
Right, absolutely. A lot of frightening thoughts in that. There's a lot of great information in this book, quite edifying for anyone to pick up. Thank you so much, Dr. Vitz, for spending time with us on Bookmark, the book, The Complementarity of Women and Men, Philosophy, Theology, Psychology, and Art, all-encompassing, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. I can tell you this is well worth picking up. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. Thank you.
Thank you.